The city's most beloved mayor was diverting children's social program funds to his family's accounts. When I published the first story, they sued me with the best lawyers in the country. But they didn't know I had spent 18 months building a file with sources in 4 government agencies and copies in 3 different locations. There are stories you don't want to be right about telling. Not because you're afraid to tell them, though the fear exists and is real, and it would be dishonest to deny it. But because while you are investigating them, there is a part of you that hopes to find the innocent explanation, the administrative error, the coincidence that resolves everything and lets you conclude that the people the city trusts are worthy of that trust. I investigated for 18 months with that hope. And for 18 months, the data kept telling me the same thing. There was no innocent explanation. There was only a system built with patience and precision to steal from the city's most vulnerable children the resources the state had decided to allocate to them. And I had an obligation to tell it. My name is Sophia. I am 32 years old. I am an investigative journalist specializing in public finance and governmental accountability. I work independently for 3 national digital outlets and have spent 8 years in this specialty, which has the least glamour in journalism and matters most when it works well. Financial investigative journalism is slow, technical, and frequently invisible until the moment it isn't. It requires building sources over months before having usable information. It requires understanding government financial statements and public contracts and tender structures the way a doctor understands an X-ray, not as documents, but as stories that need to be read correctly. Those skills, built over 8 years, were what allowed me to see what no one else had seen, or what no one else had wanted to see. The mayor's name is Rodrigo Salinas. He is 51 years old, the most popular politician in the city according to every poll of the last 4 years, and has a public image that has been constructed with a consistency and dedication that, in retrospect, when you understand what lies behind it, is almost admirable in its cynicism. His personal brand is childhood. School feeding programs, community centers for at-risk teenagers, scholarships for low-income students. Every inauguration documented on his social media with photographs of smiling children and speeches about the future and the responsibility of those with the power to change lives. It was the perfect image, and it was, I discovered, the perfect cover. The first sign came from a source who contacted the outlet where I publish most frequently. It was a person who worked in the Municipal Directorate of Social Development, who requested complete anonymity, and who in the first meeting told me only that there were things in the contracts of the school feeding program that did not add up and that she did not know who else to talk to. I told her to show me what she had. What she showed me in that first meeting was small, an irregularity in a supply contract that could have several explanations. It was not enough for anything, but it was enough to keep looking. I started looking. Over the following 18 months, I built the file the way files that resist the legal pressure that inevitably comes afterward are built, with multiple independent sources that corroborate each other, with original documents rather than copies of copies, with independent technical analysis that converts data into conclusions verifiable by anyone with the right knowledge. I developed 4 sources inside different municipal agencies. None knew of the other's existence. Each provided me with information from their specific area that individually was incomplete, but that cross-reference with the others built a picture that admitted no alternative interpretation. The funds of the school feeding program, which had an annual budget of several million pesos destined to guarantee a daily meal for children in high marginalization areas, were being systematically diverted through a scheme of ghost supplier companies that invoiced services that were not rendered or were rendered partially and deficiently. The ghost companies had names that said nothing at first glance, but their tax records, which are public information, showed shareholders and legal representatives with surnames that repeated. Surnames that with basic research linked to relatives of Mayor Salinas. His brother-in-law, his cousin, his brother's wife. A family network built around the budget destined to feed poor children. I kept copies of everything in 3 different places, not out of paranoia, but out of protocol. In investigative journalism involving political power, the loss of documentation is not always accidental, and the only real protection is redundancy. If they destroy one copy, there are 2 others. If they hack a server, there are physical copies. If they confiscate a computer, there are copies on encrypted cloud storage. One digital copy on a server outside the country that only I had access to. One physical copy in a bank's safe deposit box in my name. A third copy with my attorney, sealed, with instructions on what to do with it in specific scenarios I hoped not to have to activate. When the file was complete, I sent it to 2 academics specializing in public finance at different universities and asked them to review my analysis independently. Both confirmed, separately and without knowing the other's opinion, that the conclusions I had reached were consistent with the data. Only then did I publish the first story. The first story was deliberately conservative. It did not publish everything I had. It published enough to establish that there were documented irregularities in the supply contracts of the school feeding program, with the specific data supporting them, without yet making the complete connection to the mayor and his family. It was the first stone. The reaction came in less than 24 hours. The Municipal Communications Office issued a statement calling the story irresponsible and biased. Mayor Salinas appeared on his social media with a declaration mixing personal indignation with veiled threats about the consequences of publishing false information. And 3 days later, I received notification of a lawsuit for moral damage and defamation filed by the mayor personally, represented by one of the largest and most expensive law firms in the country. I called my attorney when the notification arrived. Attorney Carmen Espinoza has spent 18 years in press law and freedom of expression. When I described the situation, she listened with the attention of someone who is simultaneously evaluating the legal situation and the correct strategy. I told her I had 18 months of documentation with 4 independent sources, technical analysis from 2 academics, and copies in 3 different locations. There was a pause. She told me that changed the nature of the lawsuit completely. That a defamation lawsuit against a journalist who can prove that what she published is true is not a defamation lawsuit. It is a lawsuit that in legal terms is called a SLAPP, strategic lawsuit against public participation, which is the technical name for legal actions designed not to win in court, but to intimidate and financially exhaust whoever is making the accusation. She told me we had to respond in 2 simultaneous ways. The first was the legal defense in the lawsuit process, which with the documentation I had was solid. The second was to keep publishing because silencing the investigation was exactly what the lawsuit sought, and yielding to that would be the worst possible outcome. I told her I was already writing the second story. The second story published the complete connection, the names of the ghost companies, the tax records with the names of the mayor's relatives, the financial analysis showing the flow of money from the municipal budget to those companies, the testimonies of verified sources in 4 agencies describing how the scheme worked from the inside, and something else I had saved for this moment. Internal documents showing that the mayor's own team had been alerted internally about the irregularities 18 months earlier and had decided not to investigate them. The cover-up was documented. What followed was a period of 6 weeks that was simultaneously the hardest and most important of my career. The defamation lawsuit moved toward its first hearing with the legal machinery of the mayor's firm operating at full capacity. There were attempts to identify my sources through the legal process that my attorney blocked by invoking the source protection principles recognized in applicable legislation. There was pressure on the outlets I work for suggesting consequences in government advertising contracts if they continued publishing my investigations. 2 of the 3 outlets held firm. One yielded and stopped publishing my work. I documented that too. And there was something I did not expect. Other journalists who had tried to investigate Mayor Salinas in the past and had hit walls began contacting me with information they had kept without knowing how to use it. Information that in some cases added dimensions to the scheme I had not found. The file grew. The anti-corruption prosecutor's office opened a formal investigation based on the documentation my attorney formally filed as a complaint 6 weeks after the first publication. When the prosecutor's office has a file with 4 internal sources, verifiable academic technical analysis, and documentation of a cover-up, the process moves at a different speed than when it only has words. The precautionary measures arrived before the defamation lawsuit had its second hearing. Freezing of accounts of the identified ghost companies, travel bans for several of the mayor's relatives linked to the scheme, and the opening of an external audit of the complete budget of the municipality's social programs. Mayor Salinas requested a leave of absence from his position 3 days after the precautionary measures became public. The defamation lawsuit against me was withdrawn 5 weeks later. The criminal process is still ongoing as I tell this story. I have no certainty about the final outcome because criminal processes involving political power have their own logic and their own timelines, and it would be dishonest to promise a clean ending that does not yet exist. What does exist is this. The ghost companies were dissolved. The recoverable money was returned to the budget of the social programs. The external audit found additional irregularities that are being investigated. And the school feeding program was intervened and restructured under independent supervision. The children who were supposed to receive a daily meal and who for years received less than what they were entitled to because someone had decided that their hunger was a business opportunity, those children today have external supervision over the resources that belong to them. That does not compensate for the years lost, but it is something real and concrete that exists because someone decided to investigate, document, and publish even when the consequences were uncertain. What I want you to take from this story is not the drama or the confrontation or the ending that is still being written. It is this. Investigative journalism exists for these kinds of stories. And it works when there are people willing to do it with rigor, with patience, and with the awareness that documentation is the only thing that converts a suspicion into a truth that can be said out loud and defended in any court. Defamation lawsuits against journalists are frequently slaps, intimidation tools disguised as legal action. There are organizations that defend journalists in these situations. There are legal frameworks that protect journalism in the public interest. And there is the possibility that a person with the right tools and sufficient documentation can tell the truth about powerful people and survive the attempt to silence them. That possibility is worth defending. It always is. If this story shook you, comment. Do you believe investigative journalism is still necessary? Like if you believe funds for children deserve real protection. Subscribe for more real stories. Share with someone who needs to know there are people who investigate power, even when it has consequences. Practical tip. If you have information about corruption in the public sector, there are mechanisms to report it anonymously to anti-corruption prosecutors, transparency bodies, and specialized journalistic organizations. Keep whatever documentation you have in secure places outside your workplace. Your safety matters as much as the information.